Welcome back to the Seth Leibsohn Show. One of the advantages of audio sites on the internet is that you can go back and see the greats and hear the greats. I mentioned earlier it's William Buckley's birthday today. He would have been 95, passed a few years back. And it's one thing for people to say something about him. It's another to go back and see what he did on so many fronts, from the book writing to the debating to the lecturing to the hosting of his Firing Line TV show to the syndicated columns. The outpouring of work was just enormous, and the body of work is enormous. And, you know, I think a lot of young conservative writers once upon a time aspired to be like him. You can't. That comes once in a lifetime if you're lucky. Someone with that kind of skill and dedication and ability and the whole package, really. But in an effort to celebrate him and to remind you of, you know, what a great he was, I thought I would share just some of his conclusion from the great Panama Canal debate, where he and Ronald Reagan in 1978, along with their teams, debated each other. Reagan was against the Panama Canal Treaty. William Buckley was for it. I was reading a review of it in the Washington Post, January 15th, 1975. The writer Ward Sinclair says, on the left's surprise is William F. Buckley Jr., tongue darting, eyebrows running amok, arguing the case for Senate approval. On the right, jaw jutting, hair slicked down, and California tan as Ronald Reagan, arguing against approval of the treaties. Now, one of the things I have to say about this is everyone knew Ronald Reagan wanted to run for president again in 1980. A lot of people didn't know if he had it, if he could, if his time hadn't come and gone, and if he was maybe aging out a little bit. He would have been about 66 or 67 at the time. And his performance against William Buckley, meeting him pretty much spar for spar, punch for punch, without notes, either of them, convinced people that Ronald Reagan did have what it would take for 1980. But here's Buckley in his closing, no notes, just doing what he does best, just a little of it, a little nostalgia, and a little happy birthday, Mr. Buckley.
Mr. Chairman, Governor Reagan.
No notes.
James Thurber once said, he said, you know, women are ruling the world, and the reason they're ruling the world is because they have so insecure a knowledge of history. He said, I found myself sitting next to a lady on an airplane the other day who all of a sudden turned to me. And she said, why did we have to pay for Louisiana when we got all the other states free? So he said, I explained it to her. He said, Louisiana was owned by two sisters called Louisa and Anne Wilmot. And they offered to give it to the United States, provided it was named after them. That was the Wilmot Proviso. But President Winfield Scott refused to do that. That was the Dred Scott decision. And she said, well, that's she said, that's all very well, but I still don't understand why we had to pay for Louisiana Purchase. Now, intending no slur on my friend Ronald Reagan, the politician in America I admire most, his rendition of recent history and his generalities remind me a little bit about that explanation for the state of Louisiana having been incorporated into this country. He says, we, in fact, don't negotiate under threats. And everybody here bursts out in applause. The trouble with that is that it's not true. We do negotiate under threats. 99% of all the negotiations that have gone on from the beginning of this world have gone on as a result of threats. As a result of somebody saying, as a result of somebody saying, if you don't give me a raise, I threaten to leave my job. That's
Pause it there
threat.
for a second. This was one of Buckley's great traits, is examining the common or the conventional that is said in a debate. He would incisively pick apart every little thing that you said if it had the potential to be argued or wrong. You know, most people would say, okay, we don't negotiate with terrorists, we don't negotiate under threats, and it would just pass it by and no one would really examine it. Someone like Buckley never let those kinds of conventional statements go. That was part of his great skill as a debater. But go on, just a little more.
What do you call what we did to George III? It was a most convincing threat. The fact of the matter is that there are people in Panama who don't accept the notion of Governor Reagan about the undisputed, unambiguous sovereignty that the United States exercises over that territory. In 1948, the Supreme Court of the United States, in a decision of Amelia Brown versus Connell, made the following reference, quotes, admittedly, Panama is territory over which we do not have sovereignty. 1948. In 1928, in the Luckenbach Steam Company case, the canal zone was referred to by the Supreme Court as a canal zone as a place in which there were foreign ports. William Howard Taft said to Panama that we had, quotes, not the slightest interest in colonizing. Dulles said to the United Nations in 1946, Panama is sovereign. In 1936, we reaffirmed the titular sovereignty of Panama. Americans born of foreign parents in Panama don't become Americans. The Supreme Court in 1948 said that admittedly territory over which we do not have sovereignty in a reference to Panama. We do have there the absolute right, which I do not deny and which my colleagues do not deny, to stay there as long as we want. But to say that we have sovereignty, as Governor Reagan has said, is to belie the intention of the people who supervised our diplomacy in the early part of the century. And it is also to urge people to believe that we harbor an appetite for colonialism, which we shrink from, having ourselves declared in the Declaration of Independence principles that were not only applicable to people fortunate enough to be born in Massachusetts or in Connecticut or in New York or in Virginia, but people born everywhere.
It's a pleasure to listen to someone like that, isn't it? It's a different level of dialogue, debate, and rhetoric that I think we should long for and try and replicate as best we possibly can. But to say we miss him, we have to understand what it is that we miss, and it's that. It's that. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Just one last thing from William Buckley, and then I'll move on to some other stuff we have for you here today. This was a part of his closing that also was classic, and someone reminded me I really ought to play this part of William Buckley's closing in his Panama Canal debate. Then I have a final thought on it, and then I want to move into what Heather McDonald's been up to, which is an amazing amount. Here's Buckley from his closing.
I think that Governor Reagan put his finger on it when he said, the reason this treaty is unpopular is because we're tired of being pushed around. We were pushed out of Vietnam because we didn't have the guts to go in there and do it right, just as Admiral McCain said. We're prepared, as it was said, to desert Taiwan because 3.5 Harvard professors think that we ought to normalize our relations with Red China. We are prepared to allow 16 semi-savage countries to cartelize the oil that is indispensable to the entire industrial might of the West because we don't have a diplomacy that's firm enough to do something about it. And therefore, how do we get our kicks? How do we get our kicks? By saying no to the people of Panama. I say...
pretty clever what he's doing there. Keep going.
I say that when I am in a mood to say no, representing the United States, I want to be looking the Soviet Union in the face and say no to the Soviet Union next time it wants to send its tanks running over students who want a little freedom in Czechoslovakia. I want to say no to China when it subsidizes genocide in Cambodia on a scale that has not been known in this century, rather than simply forget that it exists. I don't want to feel that the United States has to affirm its independence by throwing away its powers to distinguish, by saying we must not distinguish between the intrinsic merits of rewriting the treaty in Panama and pulling out of Taiwan because it is all a part of the same syndrome.
Yeah, that's the Buckley, all of the Buckley, a part of all of the Buckley that we missed. I remember we did when I was with Bill Bennett, a show, we did a tribute to him on his passing, 2007, 2008, somewhere in there. And we opened it up to callers asking what their memories of Bill Buckley was. I'll never forget the trucker who called in and said, first time I saw him on TV, I could hardly understand a thing he was saying, but I knew I wanted to. And thus I subscribed to his magazine. I'll never forget that. I could hardly understand a thing he was saying, but I knew I wanted to. So got a lot of wisdom in recognizing that kind of wisdom. And that's why Buckley himself was so comfortable saying he'd rather be governed by the first 2,000 people in the Boston phone directory than the first 1,000 names in the Harvard faculty directory. Think of the last president who represented that. Well, he's the current one. I'm Seth. We'll be right back.